Aye.
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 And thank you for those of you raising your electronic hand. Anyone opposed? Okay, the motions have been approved. The next item on our agenda is greetings from Dr. Glass, our Commissioner of Education. He has another meeting and he will be joining us in a few minutes. So I don't want to keep us up anymore, keep us waiting. We're going to move along. And our first guest today is Brian Perry. He's Director of Government Relations and with the Office of the Commissioner, and he's going to be sharing an update on what's going on in the legislature.
Good morning. Let's see if I can get my PowerPoint up here. There we go. Can you all see my PowerPoint now?
We can, Brian. Thank
Okay,
you.
Great. If I can. All right, so let's move through here. So just a quick recap. We're about a month away from the end of session. So right now they're scheduled to sine die on April 14th. The 15th is technically available, but it is Good Friday, and I think they're trying to avoid that at all costs. So right now, sine die is April 14th. There were just over 1,100 bills filed this session, so a lot of potential legislation out there. An awful lot of these bills didn't even get assigned to committee, however, so they get introduced, but really don't go any further than that first step. And then obviously a number of them get filed to committees but never get heard. So it really filters down to a handful that are moving at this point. There are an unusual number of shell bills this year. These shell bills are essentially placeholders. So the filing deadline was a few weeks ago for both chambers. So after that point, they cannot introduce any new legislation or new bills, but they can continue to offer up amendments to existing bills. So they file these shell bills as a way to have placeholders. This is normally there's a handful of these. You know, each committee chair, for example, might have a couple relating to their particular area. This year, there's just a lot more of them, so we'll be watching those. And finally, after quite a bit of time where nothing was moving, lots of bills are starting to move between chambers now. So we're getting to the late stage of the session, so we're really starting to see things happening. In terms of the General Assembly's priorities, the budget's top of the mind. We'll talk about that in just a second. You've seen tax reform also get introduced now, and I think that's going to be their next biggest priority. And then everything else is after that. And for us, that includes those things you see there, the school choice bills that are out there, the charter school bill that's in the House, and then there's two Senate-related CRT bills that are both moving in the House now. So just a quick recap on the budget process. So House Bill 1 is the budget bill this year. It was an unusual session in that the House unveiled their budget proposal first and filed it as House Bill 1, both of which are pretty unusual. The lower the bill number, the higher it is for the priority of that chamber. So House Bill 1, Senate Bill 1 are the top priorities for those chambers in each session. So to see the budget as House Bill 1 was very unusual. The governor unveiled his proposal about a week after the House. They did file that, but it's House Bill 1 that is the budget bill. The Senate passed out their version last week. I think as everybody expected, the Senate version overall includes less money for education. However, the next step in the process will be for them to start meeting in conference where they will hammer out the leaders from each chamber will hammer out the final budget. I think we're all expecting that the final numbers are somewhere in between what the House proposed and what the Senate proposed. And the Senate was higher on some things. It's just overall they included less money. But I think that we'll see that number go up a little bit and come down a little bit from where the House was, and the final numbers will be somewhere in the middle. Overall, this is still a very good budget for education in general compared to the last few biennia. So I think everybody on the education side is still pretty excited about what the final budget is going to look like. So once the conference committee finishes finalizing the budget, they will send that to the governor for action. The governor does have line item veto power in the budget. However, the General Assembly can override each of those vetoes with a simple majority vote in each chamber. Being that they hold supermajorities in both chambers, what they send to the governor, in all likelihood, will be the final enacted budget. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of House bills to run through, so I'll try to go through these fairly quickly. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take them afterwards, or if you have any bills that I don't mention that you'd like me to touch on, we can certainly try to do that. So like I mentioned, tax reform is out there now, so there's two very different proposals from the chambers. The Senate unveiled a relatively straightforward tax rebate, for lack of a better word, where they would send out checks of up to $500 to folks. The House introduced a much more comprehensive tax reform. So for a number of years, they have talked about wanting to implement the Tennessee model, where they have zero state income tax. So House Bill 8 is the first step in that process. It would immediately lower the income tax rate by a full percentage point starting January 1 of next year. And then as various economic metrics or benchmarks are met, it would continue to lower that rate until it gets to zero. At the same time, it continues to expand the sales tax base that they started, I think, back in 2018, when you saw them add things like lawn care service, dry cleaning, and other things to that sales tax base. So the idea is that as the income tax revenue goes down, it gets replaced with the sales tax revenue. They're trying to avoid the Kansas situation where the state revenues just fell off a cliff when they tried to push their income rate down. So that's the House version, much more comprehensive, something they've been talking about for quite a while. House Bill 9 is a public charter school bill. We're not surprised to see this. Charter schools have been introduced, I think, in each of the last few sessions. So this is the version this year. Right now, it has not been assigned to committee, or it hadn't been as of yesterday. I'll have to double check to see if it got assigned late yesterday. So it's not moving right now, so we're keeping an eye on it and having some conversations about that one. House Bills 14 and 18 were the two early CRT bills that the House filed. Neither of those are going to move. House Bill 23 is one of the transgender sports bills. And I just noted on here that it has a lot of co-sponsors. It just kind of indicates that this is a priority for that chamber. It did get limited to grades 6 through 12. So the earlier versions of these were a little broader in terms of what grades they applied to, including post-secondary. It has passed out of committee, but it's not gone any further than that right now. House Bill 28 started moving last week. It's an immunization disclosure bill filed by Savannah Maddox. It passed out pretty much on a party line vote, but has not been assigned in the Senate. House Bill 31 is another one that kind of surprised, I think, a few people in that it's bipartisan in a rare moment of bipartisanship these days. It's the Crown Act filed by Attica Scott out of Louisville. It is a kind of a social justice bill in that it protects different types of hairstyles from discrimination in schools. So we got reported favorably from House Judiciary last week. So we'll probably see that move in the House at some point. House Bill 33 is a school facilities bill. We were hopeful that this would make it across the finish line this year, as this is, I think, the second or third year for this bill. We got it out of the House pretty early on, and it's been sitting in Senate Education. It does not look like this one will make it across the finish line this year, unfortunately. Same for House Bill 44. It passed out of the House pretty early in the session, has been in Senate Education ever since. House Bill 51 was moving last week. We're not sure if it will continue to move or not, but I wanted to mention it. It is a mask mandate. It has been amended quite a bit, so it's now COVID specific, but does allow schools to offer a mask or to implement a mask mandate, but it must include an opt-out provision. So it's been assigned to Health and Welfare in the Senate. It did have a pretty slim margin in getting out of the House, as you can see there, 56 to 35. A number of members of the majority party kind of noted their hesitation at going back and forth between giving control to the districts like they did in the special session not that long ago, and now changing to more of a parental control model. So just wanted to note that. It's a pretty narrow vote these days. House Bill 63 would require a school resource officer by August 1st. Again, picked up some amendments in committee that ties it to available funding and offers up a way for schools to get in districts to get a waiver through the state school security marshal. House Bill 126 is a priority of Chair Huff in the House. She's the House Education Chair. She's been working on a FAFSA graduation requirement for a few years now. And this got amended, as you can see there, as kind of just strike through, but it's now a FAFSA information requirement. I thought that might be enough to get it moving again, but it's still awaiting a vote on the House floor. House Bill 194 passed out of Senate committee unanimously last week and has been placed on the Senate consent calendar, or is headed to the Senate consent calendar. Hasn't been placed on there just yet, but it would offer up students in alternative education programs the option to get a GED if they're not on track to graduate. And the Senate or the committee sub for this one lets local school districts define what's on track to graduate. It does allow KDE to offer up kind of suggestions on what that might look like, but not requirements. House Bill 226 is the companion to Senate Bill 9. Senate Bill 9 was actually just being heard in Education Committee when I left to come over here this morning, so it should have passed out of House Education. Now it did. So both of these bills, House Bill 226 and now SB 9, have been amended to include House Bill 93. That bill addresses some of the concerns around read to achieve. Both of these bills are read to succeed bills, and there were some members that wanted to just make sure there were guardrails in place to protect read to achieve. So 226, and it looks like SB 9 will be the one that moves, but both of these will implement read to succeed. They both have funding attached to them in both versions of the budget. I think it's $11 million in each year of the biennium in both the House and Senate version, with KDE offering to include some additional ARPA monies each year, I think to the tune of $10 million. So there is funding for these. So it's pretty exciting to see these get real close to the finish line. But it looks like Senate Bill 9 will be the one that probably crosses the finish line. House Bill 270 is a child abuse awareness law. It's modeled after a national model called Aaron's Law. I think it's passed in 37 other states at this point. It passed out of the House. It got a floor amendment that addressed some of the concerns that I think teachers were initially included as offering this training, and that's been narrowed to has been reduced to a much narrower band of professionals that are specifically trained for this type of thing. So it hasn't moved out of the House yet, or it hasn't moved in the Senate yet, though. House Bill 277 kind of somewhat surprisingly started moving last week as well. It had been sitting out there since early in the session, so it kind of got late legs, but it offers up a new expedited pathway. It would be option 9. It did get reported favorably from House Education and is awaiting action on the floor, so we'll see if it moves any further this session, or if this is something that will get picked up in the interim and be discussed more then with kind of all the stakeholders coming together. House Bill 305 is the companion to Senate Bill 50. These are the two school choice bills this year. House Bill 305 does have 20 co-sponsors, including the speaker, but it has not yet started moving, and it's getting awfully late in the session for it to do so. So we'll see if anything happens with either of the school choice bills this year. House Bill 397 is one that the districts in Western Kentucky impacted by the tornadoes have been waiting for. It will waive 15 student attendance days and count those as completed employment contract days for school personnel. This one also got reported unanimously out of Senate Education last week and is headed to the Senate consent calendar. So it should be headed to the governor for action fairly quickly. House Bill 487 is the third and final CRT bill that was filed in the House this year. It has the same sponsor as House Bill 18 and has not yet started, hasn't even been assigned to committee at this point. House Bill 522 was one that the districts asked for. This is an odd bill in that a few years ago, I think back in 2020, the sponsor filed it, got out of both chambers, but picked up an amendment in the Senate that the House apparently didn't concur with. So it didn't go to the governor for action, even though it passed out of both chambers. So we asked for him to refile it for us, but unfortunately we haven't been able to get that one moving this year. So probably be something that we revisit in the interim and try to get moving next year. The rest of these are bills that got filed either right before or on the filing deadline. And so most of them are not moving. but I just wanted to kind of show you all what had been filed, because these are things that may come back around. There are things that may be talked about in the interim, so just want to make you all aware. House Bill 527 would establish a student loan forgiveness program. This is one of a handful of bills that are starting to look at how do we address the teaching shortage, both recruitment and retention. I think this is kind of mirroring what we've seen the legislature do over the past few sessions with the healthcare and nursing in particular. And so this year there's actually some nursing recruitment and retention things that are moving, some with some pretty substantial funding behind it. So I'm pretty hopeful that they keep these ideas going about how do we teacher recruitment and retention in the interim. So anyway, that's the first one. House Bill 601 is a non-instructional planning time compensation. House Bill 623 is the same as 601, but expands eligibility to the Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship Program to include a pathway for a bachelor's degree in education. That's a pretty substantial change for Work Ready Kentucky Scholarship, which right now is for an associate's degree or less. So it's only up to 60 hours, so half of a bachelor's degree. But I think it's, again, just an interesting idea that someone has proposed and is kind of getting that conversation started. So House Bill 639 actually was on the House Education agenda today and passed out of House Education. This is Representative Tipton. He is starting a conversation about this. So we'll see if this goes this session. I think that we weren't really expecting it to move this session, so a little surprising to see it move. House Bill 680 is Representative Ed Massey from Northern Kentucky. Would create a virtual computer science academy. It was reported favorably from House Education last week. House Bill 703 is another one of Chair Tipton's priorities, but really with an eye down the road. He just wanted to start a conversation with this one, but he is trying to get a conversation going about moving from average daily attendance to average daily membership for SCAAC funding. So we will, sorry, someone's calling me. We will see if that conversation continues in the interim. House Bill 704 is another retention and recruitment bill. This one would establish a loan forgiveness program for teachers and administrators. All right, so that's all of the House bills. There's actually a lot more than that. That was my attempt at kind of an abbreviated list, but you can see how many there are of interest to education. Over in the Senate, we have a lot fewer bills. So 100 House members versus 38 Senate members. So Senate Bill 1, top priority for the Senate, has finally started moving. It would move principal selection and curricular decisions to the superintendent. We've already talked about Senate Bill 9, but again, the real concern in the Senate on this one was that the potential impact on read to achieve. There is none, so I just want to make that real clear. Senate Bill 50 is that school choice bill, and you'll note here that it doesn't have any co-sponsors, unlike the House where it had quite a few. Senate Bill 60 was a Head Start bill. It passed out of the Senate probably about a month ago, but has not moved in the House. Senate Bill 61 is one of KDE's priorities that we are excited to see get near the finish line, and I don't know that it passed out yesterday, but it should pass out of the House here probably this week if it didn't yesterday. Senate Bill 83 is another of the transgender sports bills. Just like the House version, this one has been amended to start with 6th grade and go through 12th grade, although this one did pick up a committee sub last week that re-expands it to post-secondary. So we'll see where they go with these. But it's over. This one has been reported from education last week, so it was on the floor. So Senate Bill 102 is a data collection bill that would have schools send information on school-based mental health services to KDE. KDE would then report that information to the Interim Joint Committee on Education. Senate Bill 138, I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's been talked about quite a bit on social media. It is the last of the CRT bills. This one was filed by Chair Wise. It is over in House Education right now. With Senate Bill 1 moving, I'm not sure that they moved both of these, So we'll see if one or both of those make it to the finish line. My thought is Senate Bill 1 will go to the governor for action, but I'm not 100% sure that Senate Bill 138 will. Senate Bill 151 was another one that was on House Education agenda for this morning. This is another one that KDE is in favor of. It would allow for students to have school breakfast during instructional time. Senate Bill 215. This is a Senate companion to House Bill 93, which has now been rolled into both House Bills 226 and Senate Bill 9. So a little confusing, but that's all that it is. Senate Bill 284 was an act related to the financing of school buildings. It's been assigned to Senate Education, but hasn't gone any farther. Senate Bill 351 is another masking bill, but has not moved, other than getting assigned to committee. And I think that's it. So with that, I will see if I can stop presenting and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Does anyone have any questions? So Brian, I do have one. You've mentioned several bills that I start as important to this committee. Obviously, the one on Read to Succeed, I think you said to follow Senate Bill 9. Is that correct?
So Senate Bill 9 passed, yes, Senate Bill 9 passed out of House Education this morning. So it will likely go to the House floor for action fairly soon. But so now so this morning they amended Senate Bill 9 to also include House Bill 93. So Senate Bill 220 or House Bill 226 and Senate Bill 9 are now identical. So whichever one moves or goes to the governor for action will be the bill. But one of those will almost certainly go. They've both cleared each other's chambers now. Or in the opposite chamber, and both have funding attached in both budgets. So it's looking at the same amount. So I think that's a pretty safe bet at this point.
Okay, and the other ones, just Senate Bill 1 does have big impact on this committee because it deals directly with curriculum, and it is, am I correct, and it's moving the selection of a curriculum back to the district level and away from the council? Is that how it's currently being presented?
Yes.
So we should follow Senate Bill 1 because Kentucky has for a long time had the site-based councils making curriculum decisions, and this would move back.
Yes.
And then Senate Bill 61 is really a great cleanup for any student trying to become an early grad.
Yes,
and
so we're very happy to see that one getting very close to the finish line now.
And then I think there's been a lot, like you said, in social media and a lot of different organizations sending responses in on Senate Bill 138. And can you just, because that one does deal directly with curriculum, can you give us a quick update on how we should follow that one or where we can see information about that?
Sure. Let me double check 61 for you real quick. So Senate Bill 61 has not passed the Senate just yet. It was posted for passage yesterday, but didn't go through. So hopefully they will get to that one soon and send it to the governor for action. And then let's look at 138. So 138 is currently in House Education. So House Education just met this morning. It was not on the agenda. So there's always a chance that they will call a special meeting of House Education for later this week. So just pay attention to that and see if Chair Huff calls a special session. If not, the next time they would be a week from this morning. So next Monday morning, the House Education agenda will come out for the following day. So if it's, again, not on there, it's getting pretty late in the session. So if it's not on, so really maybe 2 more sessions of House Ed, maybe 3, minus any special called sessions. So.
Does anyone else have a question for Brian? And Brian, can you do you care to just tell us where you're getting all this information and the best place for us to look in case we're not as familiar with, we could jump into, I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill. Those of us who grew up in the 70s and 80s know Schoolhouse Rock version.
It is complicated to follow along at times. So there's a couple ways to follow along. If you want to follow along in real time, it sounds a little ridiculous, but get on Twitter. So there's several folks that tweet essentially live from committee rooms. So, like this morning, you could have followed along, sort of. If you want to watch the debates, KET usually airs all of the committee hearings. If they're not on KET's channel, the LRC has their own YouTube channel. So if you just Google Kentucky LRC YouTube, it'll take you to their site. Between those two, everything is on one of those. All the committee meetings are on one of those. So that's an easy way to follow along. And then if you just kind of want to see where a bill is in the process, if you go to the LRC's website and go to bills, then 2022 regular session, then House and Senate, you can find every bill posted there. So as long as you know the bill number, you can chase it down and kind of see where it is in the process. So it gets updated every evening after the session is over, or after the day is closed out. So check late in the evening if you want to see anything that moved that day. And you're always free to reach out to me. Obviously, that's what I'm here for. So feel free to give me a call or shoot a text over or email. Just tell me what bill you're interested in, and that's probably your easiest option.
Well, thank you, Brian. It was very informative, and I have my watch list now, which will help me focus instead of clicking and trying to remember that bill number. I do want to remind everyone in the committee that Brian's slide deck is included in our Google Drive. So if you didn't grab the notes, you can review. Any more questions for Brian? Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, there was a question in the chat. It says, is there a specific person or organization we should follow on Twitter?
Just look for some of the news folks from Louisville and Lexington. So let me see. Make sure I get their names right. So KSBA does a nice job. They're usually right on it and tweeting out pretty fast. Olivia Crow. Shoot, of course, none of them are showing up right now on my Twitter feed. I'll drop some names in the chat for you all to follow. How about that?
Perfect.
All right. There it is.
Okay. Well, thank you so much again, Brian. And
Sure.
everybody on the committee, watch as we get down to the final kind of few weeks of the session. So we are going to move on now to Dr. Nicole Fields.
Good morning.
Good morning. Dr. Fields is going to provide us with a diversity, equity, and inclusion effort update.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen with you. Thumbs up, good. Okay, so I'm Dr. Nicole Fields. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Department. We're out of the Office of Teaching and Learning. And I just want to let you know I'm actually at the University of Louisville today for a conference. So if you hear students in the back, please bear with me. So today we're going to talk about how we define diversity, equity, inclusion. And we're currently working on our definition for belonging to make sure it's cohesive and to introduce some of the stakeholders to new resources that we have coming out of our Department of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, which we call DEIB. Commissioner Glass just sent out a newsletter recognizing our new diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging coordinators at our co-ops. So these are their names. If you haven't had a chance to read it, please read it because it gives you a little more background about each of our colleagues and the great work that they're doing in their co-ops. And we have additional co-ops that work specifically with our special ed and our early childhood. How do we define diversity in DEIB? It is individual differences, example, personality, learning styles, and life experiences, and group social differences such as racial, ethnicity, socioeconomics, class, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, country of origin, differing abilities, as well as cultural, political, religious, and other affiliations that can be engaged in the service of learning. And this is a definition that we want to use, that we are using across the state when it comes to diversity. So how do we celebrate diversity in KDE? We are celebrating diversity by showing equity. And equity, and this is from our commissioner, equity is the education and fundamentally an effort to ensure that all of our students have the support they need to meet our academic standards and to reach their full potential as students, citizens, and human beings. As equity focus in education recognizes that public school students come to us with a variety of backgrounds, needs, supports, and experiences that must take those in account when we consider the education of each child. As you know, we just went through a pandemic and everybody was affected very differently. So we have to make sure that we're addressing that with an equitable lens because what I experience may be very different from what you experience. So that's another way you can look at equity. So what are some examples of how KDE is providing equitable access to all of our stakeholders? We do this by inclusion. Inclusion is the intentional act of creating an environment that fosters mutually respectful relationships in which each student, regardless of their intellectuality, social, cultural, and geographic background, is welcome, supported, and valued as fully participating members of society. Every student, every family should have an inclusive environment in which they're working in. And that is what we strive to do when we work with our students in DEIB. And our Commissioner Glass focuses on a radical inclusion. And this means I go to this concept of radical inclusion, meaning that we go out of our way to identify individuals in groups who are typically outside of conversations and decision-making processes and create supports and intentional structures to involve them. So overall, we are very intentional of looking at underrepresented students and families. So how do we create and support this radical inclusion at KDE? The one thing we do is that we have the Kentucky Equity Toolkit. And it's a multi-tiered approach when it comes to equity. But I'm going to focus today on our equity dashboard. And I'm going to show this quick video of our Chief Equity Officer, Dr. Thomas Wood Tucker, and he's going to introduce this equity dashboard. I'm just going to show a few minutes of it, if it'll allow me to click on it. Can y'all hear that first of all? I can't see you, so let me go back.
We cannot hear it. When you click the
Okay.
share button at the top, you'll see on share content, there'll be something that says include
I got you.
computer sound.
All right. We
Also,
should be good to go. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, you're fine. It looks like you might be just sharing a window instead of your whole screen, which may preclude us or keep us from
Okay.
seeing the video as well.
Let's see. Content only, side by side. It's better?
I can see it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Dr. Thomas Woods Tucker, Deputy Commissioner and Chief Equity Officer at the Kentucky Department of Education. I'm extremely proud to introduce you to the Equity Dashboard suite of visualizations, a tool created to support schools and districts as they consider data points through an equity lens. This dashboard will help teams identify groups of students who are at risk of being over or even underrepresented in different areas like chronic absenteeism and advanced coursework using an easy to understand color-coded system. The dashboard is designed to offer a big picture look that will help schools and districts identify areas needing further attention. KDE defines equity as the promotion of access, opportunity, and advancement of all individuals, including those in underserved communities, in order to identify and eliminate conditions that prevent the ability of all students to reach their full potential. Assessing school and district equity is about more than just identifying challenges and offering recommendations. It is also about creating an intentional, ambitious, and urgent path forward for Kentucky districts to improve outcomes for all students. When we say all students, it is with the understanding that each student comes to the district with unique and valid needs for learning, that there are students in often marginalized groups that require our attention and intervention in ways that address specific opportunity gaps, and that the ways in which we seek equity for one student improves our ability to sustain equity for all students. Equity provides for students to be seen and to see themselves in their lived experiences in the learning environment, inclusive of gender, race, ethnicity, gender identity, and ability. The remainder of this video will orient you to the equity dashboard so that your team can begin utilizing this powerful tool to identify areas of inequity and problem solve how to ensure all students reach their full potential. I'm very excited to see what we can accomplish together as we walk this path towards equity for all.
And get back down to where I was. Okay, so what is it? The Equity Dashboard is a program that takes data from the districts through Infinite Campus. It represents data in which ways that encourage you to consider opportunities to improve your systems from all students. So where is it? The Equity Dashboard utilizes the Infinite Campus data, and it's actually in a suite that you can get to from our website, but you have to have access to it. Not everyone has access to this data, but once we go through the training, you'll get access to the data. And you can access your data from your districts today, and it gives you live data. And I'm going to show you in a few minutes an example of what the dashboard looks like. The dashboard compares two groups from a variety of demographics that they're corresponding in their non-groups. So, for example, the racial ethnicity groups are all listed there, and the other student groups are listed there. So you have your female, you can compare Hispanic students are compared to non-Hispanic students, and homeless students are compared to non-homeless students. So there's a 4-step problem-solving process, which helps us get to the root cause of the analysis. So the first step we go through is the problem identification. You want to go through the questions and ask yourself, what should all students know and understand to be able to do a result of the universal learning support? So we were looking at children in our community that are not ready for kindergarten. We'll go through the 5 whys. And it's important to ask yourself the 5 whys so you can get to the root cause analysis. So we say children in our community are not ready for kindergarten. Why is that? Not all children in the community are going to high quality preschools. So if they're not going to high quality preschools, why is that? There are not enough high quality preschools in our community. But why is that? Preschool staff need additional training and education to provide high quality preschool education. So why is that? Professional development opportunities are not available for preschool staff. So overall, we believe the root cause analysis for this particular thing is that community colleges do not offer training and professional development opportunities for our staff. And the 5 whys is something that you can do just with your staff when you're trying to identify a particular problem. This is real data, a screenshot of some real data in Kentucky. And we looked at all risks of overrepresented students with a race ethnicity group. And so if you look at it, the blue shows you a low risk. The orange color show you the high risk. And as you can see, Black students were 3.35 times likely to receive out of school suspensions, which is in this quadrant right here, compared to their peers. This student group is overrepresented in this category. This information will be good when, say, for example, counselors want to see and assistant principals are looking at suspension data to say, okay, we have our African American students who have been suspended 3.35 times. They can go through the problem solving analysis tool and ask themselves the 5 whys. Why is this happening? Where is the disconnect? And work down to the root cause analysis. In school suspensions in Kentucky. In this particular example, you see that Black students are 2.74 times likely to receive an in-school suspension as compared to their non-Black students. So as you see in the two examples, we have a lot of out-of-school and in-school suspension. So the team that works particularly with these students can say why, again, the root cause analysis of this and grow through the 5 whys to help them determine why this is happening. And they can do this for any group, any gender, for any of the categories listed above. The cool thing about the dashboard is that you can use these filters and filter it down, particularly to what you want to know about your particular groups in your school. Yes. Academic proficiency. So do you see the trend in Kentucky right now? Remember that I told you the orange colors are students that are particularly at risk. And as you can see, the students of color are all at risk in this particular representation on this dashboard. When we present this to our co-ops and the ones that we're training on this particular information, we have them go through what is called an equity walk. And this is really eye-opening when you show them the data and we put it up around the room and they actually view it and have discussions. Okay, did y'all hear that sound that time?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yes, we did.
We call this the data equity walk. We think it's important, once again, that we engage in the data. We know that data doesn't tell the complete story. We know there's context to the data that you see. We want you to go and do a gallery walk and answer some of the questions that you see. Number one, what is the general reaction that you get from the data? How does the data strike? What's the story behind the data? How does this connect to your personal experience? What further information would be helpful, and what solutions do you think can happen to address these issues?
One thing about the equity walk that I have really enjoyed is that when you have all the stakeholders present, and it's also good to do the equity walk with students because student voice, they also provide a different lens on what they see. You have family voices, you have counselors, you have friskies, you have teachers, you have parents. That context matters, and it's important to know that while the Kentucky Department of Education's Equity Dashboard should be extremely helpful to educators, context matters, and this is not the only data the district and school leaders should consider. The authors of the document we've been reading Street Data, and this is a phenomenal book that talks about using qualitative data instead of quantitative data that gives you voice to the numbers. It gives you more human interaction and gives you meaning. It honors and values and lifts up the voices of the students and their families when you're actually using the qualitative and the quantitative data. We have to retain a vision of what is possible when we build classrooms and schools and systems around students' brilliance, cultural wealth, and intellectual potential rather than self-serving narratives that have us fixing and filling academic gaps. I know a lot of times I was a counselor in elementary, middle, and high, that sometimes we get so involved on numbers and not think about the context of it. Yes, we want to have student success, but sometimes there are barriers to student success. So we have to dig deeper to find out what those barriers are so we can help those students be successful. So that way we can build systems around that so we can show our students brilliance. And we do this by practicing social emotional learning. We look at the whole child. We look at their climate and the culture. And diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is very important when we're looking at social emotional learning. We focus on early childhood and the workforce development and career and technical education, because ultimately the goal is to take this document um, from recommendations to law to show that social emotional learning is a key component when helping our students and having a best practice in the framework of Kentucky. As a previous school counselor, I always look forward to the statewide counselor professional learning opportunities. Um, we've had phenomenal speakers that come in on various topics to talk about supports and systems and equity and how to apply that into my particular job. So I don't know if someone's going to say something because I can't see you. Um, these opportunities are great, and this is something that we also offered in KDE. So we have a Kentucky Academy for Equity in Teaching. We want to inspire, prepare, and educate all of our teachers. So one of the things we like to celebrate is our new website for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And it's right there on the main screen. You can just click on it, and you will see that we also have resources to the right-hand side that teachers and families can get to this and access it. And as you can see, that's our equity dashboard. It's one of our multi-tier supports that we utilize to support our students and families. And you will see we have definitions there, and pretty soon we'll put our definition of belonging, our core values, and you see our team listed there. As a school counselor, this is something that I was super excited about, how we blended the personalized graduation requirements connected to the individual learning plans. This is really important for high school students. The individual learning plan, excuse me, excuse me, help them figure out what they want to be in the future. It's personalized and it's connected to their core contents for graduation. So it's just not an extra document that they're doing. It is something that they can use to help them make sure they're um, graduated, prepared, and have an actual plan for when they graduate. With them individualized learning plans, they're connected to their Google Classroom, and we have ILP Playbooks. And the cool thing about the playbooks, if it pops up, there are resources in there, and there are lesson plans already built in to help you when you're implementing these lessons. And as a counselor, I utilize these quite frequently when working with my students. So I always appreciated that there was a resource there. And guys, I'm sorry for the background noise. One of the things we're most proud of is that in Kentucky, when it comes to the advanced placement exams, no student would pay more than $10 for the school for that test for this school year. So I just want to make sure we get that message out to all the schools that again, that no student would pay no more than $10 for that test for this school year. Bringing people with us. Our internal KDE team, we have Dr. Woods Tucker, Dr. Damian Sweeney, myself. We have Dr. Chang, who's our strategic analysis, and we have Heather Wishelman as well. So that is our core team. Additional to, we have our DEBI officers, and coordinators at our various co-ops and counties. We have a bi-weekly meeting that we meet every 2 weeks when it comes to our regional DEBI coordinators. And we just met with them in person last week. So it was so exciting to see them because living in this virtual world, I miss having face-to-face contacts. So it was really great to see them. We have a new DEIB coordinator in the Office of Special Ed and Education or Early Childhood. And then 2 consultants, which is myself and Dr. Chang. And we tapped in the Commissioner Student Advisory Council as well. And I look forward to his upcoming meeting with them to meet those students as well. Currently in progress, we're working with the Kentucky Education Television on asynchronous safe spaces, creating courses for educators to receive micro credentials. And we have what we call an RFP, which is request for proposals, out for live coaching on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging for our co-ops, districts, and schools. On our to-do list, we want to create a community stakeholder advisory council, similar to the Commissioner Glass's council, but one specifically for DEIB to work on our strategies and our priorities. We're going to begin requests for proposals to begin six asynchronous modules that they can get micro credentials using national experts on topics like restorative practices, fostering equity, and taking a deeper learning into more DEIB topics. I'm excited about a podcast that's coming this way. We're going to highlight some of our co-ops and the great works that they're doing and allow us to introduce you to those folks as well. And we're in the process of working on a monthly newsletter for all stakeholders throughout Kentucky. Ultimately, this whole presentation, I want you to walk away knowing that DEIB is not a destination, it's a journey. And everyone deserves an equitable experience in school. That is our students, that's our staff, that's our teachers, that's our family. But ultimately, we want our students to feel like when they come to school that they're getting the best experiences that we have to offer them. And DEIB is there to help them along this way in this journey. So thank you for your time. That is our Twitter handles, Dr. Fields, that's Dr. Tucker's and Dr. Sweeney's Twitter handles. I feel like I went through that pretty fast.
Thank you, Dr. Fields. At this time, I want to see if anybody has any questions for Dr. Fields.
Yes, Chuck Fletcher, would like to ask the question at this time.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very good and
Thank
very
you.
educational as well. A question I have at this point is, when was this data presented? Was that 2021 data or what?
On the screenshot?
Yes, ma'am. Uh-huh.
Yes, but you remember I told you it's live data. So what I showed you is probably 3 or 4 days, a month ago. That's not something I snapshot last night to say this is live. So that is not a live data point.
Okay.
So it's an old data point that was displayed just to give you example of what it looks like when you utilize the dashboard.
And so when will the next data be presented?
If we log in now, you can actually see live data right now for your particular county. So say, for example, you were in Fayette County and you were in a Fayette County high school. You can look up your high school and go through the filters and get it pinpoint down to the student data of what the equity issues are in that particular building.
One other question, if I may. You mentioned DEI, and I forgot the last letter. Help me out.
B
Okay.
for belonging, because it's really important that students have a sense of belonging is huge. That's the connectiveness for all of the other 3 letters. So we just recently became DEIB.
Okay. I appreciate that extra letter because now I have to learn that letter as well.
Yes.
Okay. But the question I asked you, you mentioned, and which I thought was very good, you mentioned that you want this journey to include the staff, the students, and parents. And can you give me an example of how the community can be involved with this as well, are affected with this journey? And that's my last question.
That's fine. I welcome your questions. As a community engagement coordinator, one of the parts of my job is really try to give the community access and really build upon that in our schools. And one of the things I try to do is go into schools and see what's surrounding them, whether that is Girl Scouts, that is churches, and really building that fluid programs. For example, and one of the schools that I worked at previously had a lot of students that were not meeting their academic gains. And we only had so much money to provide ESS services. And so there's a church that was right next door, and they had a lot of educators that were already in that church. So we built a partnership, and they were able to help families go there after school to get homework help. So they provided homework assistance for those families. They had computers in the church because this is pre-COVID now. Before, everybody had laptops and Chromebooks that schools issue, but they were able to go there to do their homework. Also, working with the libraries, bringing people in there, you'll be surprised how many students do not have library cards, and all those programs that they offer. They offer free ACT tutoring and testing that students can do. Just really making sure that I'm showing them this is what is all that is offered in your community, and being that person to connect them to those resources. So that's a small example of how to get the community involved. You can get the community involved with even mental health. And as you know, like I said, the pandemic, it was mentally exhausting for everybody. And so making sure that we are connecting with providers that can come into the school or have after school access for families. So a lot of people, morning, just really have struggled with trying to connect that. And that is something I'm passionate about, that I really want to do in all of the state of Kentucky. So I hope I answered your question.
You sure did. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, Dr. Fields, one thing that Chuck's question kind of pointed me to was in the fall when the assessment and accountability results come out. I think it would be great if DEIB had a way for communities to engage with accountability results in a way that honored all the letters of DEIB, as well as really help schools get to and communities get to root cause. I think so often the analysis of state accountability results is done in isolation without the input of community. And I have down to order that book, Street Data.
Street Data, I love it.
I came across it yesterday in a reading, and it was so exciting to see that you all are reading that in the department as well. But I really think the more tools that you could get in the hand of the districts around that prior to those releases of results would be great. And like I said, Mr. Fletcher's comment really, made that clear to me, having the background of, being a district assessment coordinator. I see Dr. Woods Tucker, you jumped on the screen. Hello. The other thing I want to
say hello.
thank you. The other thing I want to make sure everybody's aware of as it connects to this committee, the Equity Toolkit, pay close attention to high quality standards and high quality resources. Remember, part of that toolkit is making sure all students get access to what we would call grade level standards or high quality standards and high quality instructional resources. So if you're wondering where we kind of fit in, we come in there. And then in the fall, obviously the state accountability results, we'll be looking at things, the demographics. And Mr. Fletcher, that'll be when we'll really want to look at all that dashboard data that the DEIB team has put together. Other questions from the group?
Thank you for allowing me to come in and speak to you guys today.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, we've been at this meeting for an hour, and on a Zoom call, that's a stretch. So it's 9:09 in Central Time, 10:09 in Eastern Time. Let's take a quick 10-minute break. I think we're okay with our schedule. And so we'll be back at 10:20 or 9:20. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I have 9:20, 10:20. And we are ready to continue on with our agenda. And our next presentation is from Sarah Snipes. She's the program manager, one of the program managers at KDE. And Sarah is going to be talking to us about local laboratories of learning. And just a reminder, I should have done that with Dr. Fields' presentations. All of these slide decks are included in our meeting folder. So if you want to go back and review anything, that's available. I'll turn the floor, or whatever, the virtual floor, over to Sarah.
Thank you all very much. Let me pull up my slides now. right. Hoping everyone can see this.
We can, thank you.
Right, so thank you all so much. It's great to be back with you since your last meeting. If you recall, I was able to join this group and just give an overview in the very early stages of our work with the local laboratories of learning. So very excited to provide you with an update today on our L3s. Just to guide our conversation for this portion of the meeting, we're going to discuss what trends exist in the assessment accountability prototypes that our L3s are developing. And then we'll also take a look at what communities are learning from an inclusive design process. So along with what Dr. Fields just previously shared, I think this is a wonderful bridge and connection to the work being done with our DEIB work, as well as what is happening on the ground in our communities. So just to give a little bit of background from the last time we spoke, all of this work with our local laboratories of learning is kind of housed within KDE's United We Learn initiative. This work began back in 2019 when the Board of Education approved their equity resolution, followed by the commissioner's listening tour, which happened across the spring of 2021. Of course, that was 11 virtual sessions due to the pandemic, but really that was a unique opportunity for the commissioner, KDE staff, students, families, community members to engage in sharing their experience as Kentuckians in our education system. So from those virtual sessions, we formed the Kentucky Coalition for Advancing Education, or KCAE. That group continues to meet today and will actually meet again on March 29th to learn more from our local laboratories of learning leads. That coalition took the data that came out of the commissioner's listening tour. They identified trends from additional empathy interviews that they conducted across the Commonwealth. And they took that information and they wrote, again, I just emphasize that these are Kentuckians, about 60 Kentuckians, who wrote the United We Learn report and created a co-creation guidebook to support further communities well into the future as they look at co-creating local accountability and assessment models for themselves. From that KCAE convening, we held our first annual Kentucky Education Summit in the fall of 2021, a hugely successful event that really got the public at large excited about the work that we're doing here across the state and engaged in launching our local laboratories of learning publicly as well. So just to give some background on what the L3s are working on in our communities, at the heart of this effort, they are working to forge deeper connections within their communities. So they've gone out, just like our KCAE was formed, they formed a very inclusive, radically inclusive, to quote Dr. Glass in the tweet that Dr. Fields shared, a radically inclusive local coalition. These teams are made of about 30 individuals that range from, again, students to local business owners to educators and politicians. The efforts behind forming this team is to really strengthen habits of leadership in these communities around empathy, co-creation, inclusion, and reciprocity. So while, yes, we hope to transform the assessment accountability systems of Kentucky through the work of these L3s, we also hope that at the end of the day, we walk away with strengthened habits of getting folks in the community together in decision-making spaces where some may have been traditionally underrepresented and underserved. And again, here at the core of our work, we hope to shape Kentucky's next assessment and accountability system. Our communities are working together right now to co-create new approaches, and they're using the design thinking process that you see here on the screen, walking through steps of empathy, defining challenges, ideating solutions, prototyping those solutions, and testing them to scale. And so we hope to influence policy at the state and federal level and look to make some recommendations to the legislation in 2024. A high-level glimpse of where our L3s have been. We currently have 2 active cohorts, which is a total of about 14 districts and communities. And we are currently recruiting and preparing to launch a 3rd group as well. So our first cohort has been at this for a while now. They've walked through the phases of the design process, and you can see here on the screen a little bit of the work that's brought them to where they are today. In the empathy phase, they formed those local coalitions. They went out into their communities and conducted empathy interviews, which is just a process of listening to the stories and experiences of various stakeholders in their own communities. They took that data and they came back and they analyzed the information. They refined user profiles that the KCAE created and really catered those to the local context to better understand the future vision for their community. From there, they created a problem statement and they went into a local brainstorming session where they really grappled with possible solutions for their community's education problems. They selected an idea to prototype. And from there, they've recently developed a user experience prototype. So based on their problem statement, they may have identified the user as students, community members, families, and they've developed an experience to design to improve as a solution. So currently, cohort 1 is testing these prototypes. And when I say testing, I mean a very initial feedback testing. They're going in currently into their communities to survey, to interview, and pitch their idea of a prototype to their community members and bringing that information back for refinement before they implement in their districts. So I wanted to provide a few examples of the current L3 prototypes. Allen County is currently working on designing a student experience that includes a student defensive learning system that aligns with their emerging graduate profile work. Logan County is developing a dashboard to display students' successful attainments of profile competencies, academic success, participation in internships, extracurricular activities, and more, leading to something that looks like student micro-credentials. Shelby County is currently developing a plan to engage every stakeholder in the understanding of their profile of a graduate and what it means for students, families, employers, and post-secondary institutions. In Johnson County, they're changing the way students explore career pathways and attain certification through a development of a digital portfolio. Frankfort Independent is developing a project-based capstone experience at the 5th grade level, aligned with graduate profile and implementation of a competency-based report card. Jefferson County is working to refine their backpack of success skills to include personalized opportunities for all students across grade levels to demonstrate life skills and show mastery of standards in flexible ways. And they've this is leading to the development of a mastery transcript. And finally, in Fleming County, they're refining bridge performance indicators and measures of quality dashboards while developing a communication and stakeholder engagement plan. So the communities you see here on your screen are our first cohort members. They have been at this work since fall of 2021 in their design cycles and are currently testing for feedback in their communities. Our second cohort is launching their coalitions and just starting with the empathy interview process. So now that you've seen the specifics of the gist, as I've been calling them, of our different prototypes, I just wanted to point out some trends that have been observed from our KCAE members. This group reconvened in January, at the end of January, and our L3 leaders had an opportunity to present those very prototypes to KCAE. So from there, we did some breakout sessions. We asked KCAE members to reflect on what patterns they noticed as L3 shared their prototypes. And these are some of the high-level trends that arose, connecting back to the KCAE's Commonwealth themes for a future vision of Kentucky. Many of our L3s found that Commonwealth Theme 9, and this can be found in the United We Learn report, really resonated within their community. The need to make assessments go beyond a snapshot of a whole child to reflect what communities need to do to cultivate learning. So many of their challenge statements, their problem statements, are grounded back to this particular theme from the report. Many of our districts and communities are expanding or refining some level of redesign of their existing initiatives. So this is not necessarily a scratch build for many of our districts in this first cohort. They took account of the assets that they already had, and they started to redesign them now with additional stakeholder involvement. The prototypes are currently focused on a student learning experience. So we hope to take those prototypes that are grounded in the student experience and translate those into assessment prototypes and accountability prototypes that will inform a state system. All teams want to build trust across their community by improving how they communicate their local systems. We notice that the profile of a graduate is common, but differences between communities are honored. I do want to point out a point of clarification. Several of our potential cohort 3 members were under the impression that they need to have a profile of a graduate in order to participate in the L3 efforts. That is not necessarily true. It just happens to be a common theme with our first cohort who have happened to have profile of a graduate in their districts for quite some time now. The current size and weight of the state assessment system is competing for time and attention with these prototypes. Going back to one of the main project goals for this work, we see a conflict here for our communities. How can we lift up some of these prototypes and honor them in an accountability model when we are feeling, when they are still feeling the pressure of meeting the current state assessment system's requirements? And so we just also wanted to lift up, going back to our guiding questions, what are they learning about inclusive design? We've asked these communities to get uncomfortable and challenge themselves to welcome in members to the table who have traditionally been underrepresented. And so Shelby County, leading the conversation with KCAE in January, said that building relational trust within their L3 has been the first step in achieving their goal of establishing reciprocal partnerships. Johnson County has relied on many different groups of educators, students, community members, parents, and more, and they all appreciate being included in something so important for their schools and community. Allen County has heard the voices and perspectives that they rarely hear from and might not have considered, and that has helped them see things on a larger scale. And Frankfurt reflected that we want education to be meaningful for our students and that this L3 process has acknowledged their stakeholders know exactly what that looks like for their students in the community. So just to round out our conversation today, as I mentioned, we are currently accepting applications for cohort 3. District superintendents are encouraged to email me directly if they'd like some more information. I'm happy to do one-on-one conversations to talk about how the L3 efforts might fit into the work that they're currently doing. We're all about coherence and understanding that many of our districts and their leaders feel that they have many irons in the fire at this time, and we think that the L3 work is a wonderful way to bring those pieces together to shape the future vision for Kentucky. All these superintendents need to do is have a discussion, obviously, internally to see if this is a good fit for them. With their board's agreement, they can complete an L3 agreement form and some narrative responses. Those deadlines to apply are March 22nd at 4 p.m. And we hope to announce at the end of that week who our third cohort members are and introduce them to the KCAE on March 29th. So I will stop there and just ask if anyone has questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Does anyone have questions for Sarah about the L3?
Hi, this is Leslie Jeffries. I have one quick question, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So I'm from Hart County, and I've talked to some local leadership within our school district. And one of the things that was mentioned is that they weren't 100% certain that they were ready to, they were interested in applying. But I think one of the questions is, are there any type of kind of non-negotiable variables or characteristics that you feel like that a district absolutely needs to have in order to participate in this?
That's a great question. And in our L3 agreement form, we do post some considerations for districts to think through. Typically, we have a history of seeing a lot of transformative leadership, but by no means is that a requirement, especially as we look to our third cohort. We're really looking for those communities willing to get a little messy and dive into that inclusion work. If districts are prepared and willing to go out into their communities and welcome folks into the table, into decision-making spaces, I think they're queued up to be really great members of our third cohort. We have a very cohesive system of modular designs that we've created with the Center for Innovation and Education, and Karen Perry, a member of the UK Center for Next Gen Leadership, as well as student the student voice team members as well. So we have kind of a modular approach with facilitation guides. We have resources. Everything is built out for these communities to facilitate. I think more than anything, we just need a willingness to get messy and go out there into their communities and co-create.
Great, thank you.
If I might, I want to add on to what Sarah said. Artavia Ackland, Shelby County Public Schools, I will add that they have guided us the whole way. It's been a great collaborative working relationship. It's exciting work, but like Sarah said, you got to be willing to get in and get messy. It's almost geeky kind of, just because it's so exciting to get the input of your community. We had everybody from pastors to parents to business leaders, and everybody had an equal voice. And so we're at the point now where we're getting ready to test our prototypes. I just typed in the chat that I'm so excited. I've got my student appointment ready and a teacher appointment ready, just to sit down and talk about our profile and how they're living and how we're getting it out into the community. Is it just stuck within our school walls? And so that's the exciting part here. If you think you're ready, I say go for it. I don't think you'll regret it. Again, it's time consuming work, but it's great work. I like where we're heading. But we're going to have to do this multiple counties to get it out and get it really going statewide.
Thank you, Artavia, for sharing that. And we realize that not one community, right, will shape a future system, but we hope that Shelby's a great example of thinking through the communication element of an assessment accountability system designed locally. So while each community is designing a local system, we are going to, over the next year or 2 years, look at those policy implications and think through what we need to recommend in 2024 to see some real shifts to a possible new system here in Kentucky.
So speaking of that new system, how are the current prototypes working together with the current accountability system? You know, you mentioned a lot of these about showing the profile of the graduate and what the community needs to assess, but our students are working in a global environment. And so I'm just curious about those kind of basic skills and how you see this all working together.
A lot of it is we're in a space of shared learning right now, and having those conversations. We have not yet developed that accountability prototype that builds off of these student or user-based experiences. So much of that is still a conversation to be had. However, we are seeing there's conversations statewide through our board at their last meeting talking about the profile of a graduate and those implications for what a state profile may look like. If that's the right path for us, what does that look like? So just entertaining some of those conversations right now. But I think the focus for us has been on creating space and value at the community level to have input on what that local system looks like. And so hopefully leading up to some statewide adjustments and transformation of that system. But I think right now, those conversations are still very much local until we design that accountability prototype.
And my last question is just if KCAE is going to plan to address the current state. It kind of seemed like the pushback about the timing and how much time it takes, but we do still want students to be successful on state accountability. Will KCAE start looking at that for the cohorts, the districts that are involved in the current cohorts?
Do you mean this time it takes to be involved as an L3?
Right. I guess what I was thinking of, is KCAE, you said they're going to start looking at what this looks like at the state level, but are they going to discuss kind of the feedback that the local levels are giving you that it often is feeling like an either or with state accountability systems?
Oh, absolutely. So on March 29th, for example, when those groups reconvene, we'll have another sharing out of where our prototypes are and what data has come in, what feedback looks like at the local level from these community members. And then our KCAE team will also be involved as we start to develop talking points for legislation. They'll help us do look at those policy scans and think about the implications and recommendations that will go into any kind of future system that we propose.
And my last question, Sarah, is do you know right now where the federal government is on kind of, because lots of our assessment and accountability, we also have to report back to the federal government. Are the feds or U.S. Department of Education doing anything similar?
It's a hot topic right now. There are many states engaging in this conversation. We actually saw when our friends at KnowledgeWorks are actually launching this work in another state as well in a similar way. So it's catching very quickly. But what we've seen is the federal government has actually released a grant opportunity around assessment and accountability. They seem to really be open to leaning into what states are doing and being receptive of that. From the various networks that my supervisor, David Cook, and I are involved with, we just see there is a lot of groundswell support in many states right now that we hope we will be able to leverage and lift up so that we see we are not alone in this effort, in this conversation. We are one of many states that are really pushing in this direction.
Anybody else have questions for Sarah? Sarah, we appreciate your time, and I'll just remind all the committee members you can reach her on her email, which I believe was included in her slide deck, but don't hesitate to reach out, and we look forward to seeing more updates. It's great each time to hear the changes that are going on.
Thank you. And Jana Beth, I will add, if anyone's interested in tuning into that KCAE meeting, it is always available on the KDE media portal. That will be on March 29th, I believe from 4 to 5:30 Eastern. So you can always tune in that way as well.
Thank you. That's great to know. Okay. Sarah's going to sign off, and we are now moving to an assessment and accountability update with the dynamic duo, as district assessment coordinators like to refer to, Jennifer and Rhonda.
Good morning, everyone. Sound okay, Jennifer?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. Well, it's good to see everyone. I'm not sure how dynamic our duo is today, but we're always thrilled to be with this group and appreciate the perspectives that you bring, and welcome to this new committee. This is only our second time together, and in particular, welcome to our newest member, Jason Reeves. So we appreciate your being here. And we do want to provide, I think in the planning for the meeting a little bit, we had some discussion around accountability. And so we want to kind of put a focus on accountability today and what is planned for this year. And, this is meeting the federal requirements. And so Janet Beth's last question was a little bit around that connection to federal law. And so all of you are well aware that the Education Act, which brings forth Every Student Succeeds, and earlier versions such as No Child Left Behind, there are particular things states have to do to be in compliance. And so we're excited to see that there's interest in the kinds of work with L3s that's going on, but obviously looking for what might be available to change that federal law and get some movement with it. And so, obviously, I was happy to see Janet Beth earlier mention I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill. We all remember that. And it takes a lot of steps, both in a state and federal law. So this is a part of this process is sort of helping to gear up maybe some of those steps and conversations as well. So that will come a little bit later in the L3 process. So our office and assessment accountability, we're part of the partnership. We're not directly supporting and coordinating the L3 work, but we are listening in to the L3 work. We have technical staff that are working with us to help support that work along the way as well. So just to be aware that there's a good connection there. So we've got a little PowerPoint that we've put together. When we gather together, we've got to have a little PowerPoint for you, but it gives you something to maybe use later. And, you're always free to just pick a slide from it if it's something that would help you, or to use it as a whole, whatever is convenient for you. So Jennifer and Jenny Larkins on her team, I think, has helped us pull this together. And I'm going to kick it over to Jennifer at this point, and then we'll be kind of back and forth and be looking forward to the conversation. Janet Beth, you help us as well. We're going to watch for Dr. Glass. Obviously, if he pops in, we'll be happy to pause wherever we are and let him have some words with the group, and then we can come right back to where we are. So we'll try to keep an eye on that, but if you can help us with that too, we appreciate it.
Well, good morning, everyone. And again, thank you. Let me check to see, can you hear me okay?
Yes, good sound, Jennifer.
Okay. And I've got my video on. Are you seeing my video as well? Okay, wonderful.
We are.
That's great.
Okay.
It's nice when the technology works out. So again, welcome to our newest member, Jason. We really appreciate you being here, as well as all the members of our School Curriculum Assessment Accountability. We really appreciate your time and attention on this important council. We look to you for input on various topics, and we've heard some really good presentations this morning. So I really appreciate the presenters coming in and committing their time as well here from the department. I'm Jennifer Stafford. I'm the director in the Division of Assessment and Accountability Support. I work with Rhonda very closely in the Office of Assessment and Accountability, and we're going to provide today some updates on the upcoming spring assessments and some what's happening and what the expectations are from the U.S. Department of Education on both assessment and accountability. Now, a lot of times people put those two things together, the assessment and accountability, as if they are one thing, but actually they're two different systems. You have the assessment system, where those are the measures in which the students take currently assessments. You've heard a lot of future discussions this morning about what it could be in the future and could change. But currently we have assessments that are either have been administered or going to be administered this spring. Those measures and many others are collected into what's called an accountability system. And that's a system with indicators and ratings that provide information to schools and districts, teachers, and the community at large. And so those two things are two dependent but separate systems. And we're going to talk about those particularly this morning. As far as the assessment, we are in the process of testing. We, across the state of Kentucky, have been administering the Access assessment. Access is our version of the English language proficiency exam that our English language learners take to demonstrate their knowledge and expertise on the English language. So we started that back in January, and it kicked off on a Thursday, and we had a snowstorm on that Thursday. So that put a little bit of a delay in actually administering the Access test. And it finished last Friday, March 11th. We expanded the window because of there were many delays, and school districts were closed for various reasons. So the Access window was expanded and actually closed on Friday, March 11th, in which we got another snowstorm. So in the middle of those, between those snowstorms, schools and districts exerted a lot of effort to administer the Access test to both our students that take the regular Access assessment as well as the alternate Access. Over 99% of students that we expected to test did, and that was an online assessment. So kudos to our districts and schools for completing testing throughout and overcoming all of those challenges throughout that time frame. Last week, The initial window for ACT kicked off. It was the initial window for administration of the statewide ACT assessment. Districts can choose to administer the ACT to sophomores. The particular state assessment is for our juniors. There is a provision that currently for sophomores and juniors to take the ACT. At this point, the sophomore administration has not been fully funded, and the state therefore administers the ACT to our juniors. Those, for the first window, over 20,000 students took the assessment and completed it online. And approximately 100 schools indicated that they would test with paper on March 8th, that initial test date. Now, for the ACT, this is the last year that schools can opt into paper. Because of the success we've had over the last several years with online administration, we are transitioning in the spring of 2023 to a full online administration of the ACT, with the exception of always of the students with special needs that have the need for paper. So it went really well across the state. There were some minor issues that were able to be overcome that were easily overcome within the day or two on online testing. So it was a very successful administration of the ACT last week. We have upcoming test windows for ACT. Window 2 for makeup testing for the students that were absent either on initial test date or all of last week. The test window 2 opens March 22nd, and there will be online makeup days in that second window as well. So there are online dates for administration associated with all of those windows. The Kentucky alternate Kentucky Summative Assessment begins April 18th and will last through May 27th. The alternate KSA is for our students that are in the lowest 1% of students in the state. They take an alternate assessment, and that, again, window is upcoming next month. And the last administration for this year from the state is the Kentucky Summative Assessment, and it is administered by law within the last 14 instructional day for the district. So the lots of preparation for each of those assessments are ongoing. We had very successful training of our district assessment coordinators training. We had released videos for administration of all of our assessments, and we were able to conduct in-person as well as online question and answer sessions. So we had a really good participation both online and in person for our February DAC trainings. As far as accountability, so that's our assessment. Those are the tests that contribute to the accountability system, and we'll look at those and where those assessments link to our accountability system, which will be implemented this year. So the U.S. Department of Education affirmed that it was expecting testing and accountability for the 21-22 school year. Now, back in the legislative session of 2020, so prior to the pandemic, Senate Bill 159 actually modified our accountability system in the state of Kentucky. Over the course of 20 and 21, the department worked with the Kentucky Board of Education to identify the direction that they wanted to go. Many of the indicators were prescribed in that legislation. So there was a very prescriptive direction from the state legislators on the implementation and the inputs to the state accountability system. Specifically, they have indicators. And for the 21-22 school year, those indicators will be based on status only. So in the legislation, it calls for, the Senate bill called for both status and change. Status is the current year performance, and change is the change from the status from one year to the next. So we have to have a couple of years of performance from status in order to implement change. So for this year, being the first year of the new accountability system, we'll have status only for this current year performance. In the 22-23 school year, then we'll be able to have the change so that we see the comparison from status in 21-22 to this status in 22-23. So that'll be the change. But for this year, we have the indicators that were, again, prescribed within the statute of state assessment results in reading and math, as well as the state assessment results in science, social studies, and writing. Those two indicators are based, again, on the assessments that are forthcoming within the Kentucky Summative Assessment. And you'll note there also that the writing will include both on-demand writing and editing mechanics in our state assessment results. The third indicator is the progress on English language proficiency. So the students who take the English proficiency exam that we just discussed, the access and alternate access, will contribute to the indicator of English language proficiency. And that is a measure of how students perform from one year to the next, similar to growth that we've had in the past or the change. But this is student level performance from current year to prior year. So the progress of the English language proficiency. We'll also have a quality of school climate and safety indicator, and it is based on a survey. We're going to go into that and the components of the survey in just a moment. We also have prescribed is the post-secondary readiness measure, which that is a compilation of students can demonstrate their readiness for post-secondary, whether it be academic or career and technical. And then finally, our graduation rate. And that indicator, again, is a 4- and 5-year rate for inclusion into the accountability system. That's just a high-level overview of both assessment and then accountability. And I'll turn now to Rhonda, who is going to take us through a little bit more in depth on the accountability indicators.
Sure, Jennifer. Thank you. So let's take a look. Jennifer's kind of highlighted the list, and I've been around working in this area for quite a long time now, and this is the most prescribed that the state legislation has ever been. Over the years, there has been more of a kind of broad description in legislation, and then it's been left up to the Kentucky board to sort of fill that in. And of course, we've used a lot of processes of bringing groups together. SCAAC's been heavily involved in that in different iterations of the system. So we are in a little bit different place with seeing a much more prescribed set of information, both on the accountability side as well as some of the testing requirements. So as we move to the next slide, just a reminder that we are still administering an assessment, and I will remind you that this year we are trying to make that a shorter assessment than we've had pre-pandemic. So we're targeting to try to do the assessment in around 90 minutes. We have given very generous broad times for planning. We don't think students will need as much time as we've said about in the planning, but until we get really data from students actually taking the full assessment, we want to be cautious in allowing plenty of time because it's not a timed assessment. So we're trying to keep it around 90 minutes per content area. You may remember last year we had a short test to meet federal requirements that was 60 minutes. and we feel like we cannot meet all of the requirements that you have to have with peer review in that amount of time. So reading and math, as well as the next area, which is science, social studies, and writing on demand and editing mechanics, we will still utilize our descriptions for student performance. So novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished. And we will still be pulling, the data will generate for each indicator in status the way we've done in previous years. So this year, because it's status only, quite a bit of the calculating will be very, very similar. We'll look at each student. We'll say, is that student a 100-day student in your accountability, or are they just in your testing results? And we'll say, where was their performance level? And right now, we're trying to work through all of the details around reporting. How much information can we give back? Our goal is to give a bit more to schools if we can. If we can't this first year, at least the second year out with this test design, because we're going to a much more matrixed type sample instead of every student taking the same test, to broaden out the coverage of standards as well. So I'll pause there. Jennifer, is there anything you would add on to those subject areas? And if so, you just chime in at any point.
Thank you, Rhonda. I think that you have described those, and I am trying to navigate two.
Sure. Right.
So forgive me if I just a
Sure.
pause to get the mic unmuted.
Hey, I have
Right.
a quick question.
Sure, Janabeth.
How is writing going to be combined? Because it's been a while since we've had an editing and mechanics and on-demand together, and I didn't see in the reg exactly how that would be combined.
So, Rhonda, you want me to take it?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, because we're going to basically do it through standard setting is the simple answer, Janabeth, but let Jennifer tell you a little bit more detail about it. So that's why it's not in the reg that way with weights.
Sure. So we've worked with our vendor on reporting specifically. So with writing, you're going to have 3 different actually scores or performance levels. You're going to have the student will receive a performance level of novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished for on-demand writing, as well as editing mechanics. So those, again, will be brought. Those are new assessments. As Rhonda mentioned, they're shorter. The editing mechanics has not been administered as of yet. We've had field testing, but this will be the first time that we've really had a separated independent editing mechanics assessment. So after the students are administered the assessment and we get their scores or their tests back, then we'll bring in teachers in that content area, and they will look at the students' actual responses, both for the on-demand writing and for the editing mechanics. They'll look at those and determine through a process called standard setting and determine what qualifies as a novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished in both of those independently. So then those, again, are Kentucky teachers in that content area. And after they get those performance levels for those independent assessments, then they'll come together and then look at those 2 assessments and determine how to bring those 2 together into an overall score. So based on the teachers reading teachers, writing teachers across the state, they will determine what performance levels then come together and bring in that overall writing. For example, if a student has a novice in on-demand writing and a novice in editing mechanics, they may determine that the overall is a novice. That could be pretty clear cut, as well as a student that has a distinguished in on-demand writing and a distinguished in editing mechanics. They may determine that could possibly be a distinguished overall writing. But where it may be a little less clear is if a student is distinguished in on-demand writing, and apprentice in editing mechanics. So they'll have to come to a determination, what then would that overall score be for that overall on-demand writing, or that overall writing score, when there are two separate performance areas. And that's when our Kentucky teachers and their professionalism at the table is very important. So Rhonda,
and one thing that's kind of, yeah, I just add one thing. One thing that's kind of different. Many years ago, when we had Ed 2 Mechanics, it was sort of a subtest of the whole writing test. The way the law is set up, it really requires us to do a separate status, or the idea of novice, apprentice, proficient, and distinguished for each test. So they're listed as separate tests in the legislation. So that's the level of detail you have in the legislation now that kind of drives how you bring people together and combine it.
Thank you.
That's a great question, Janet. I appreciate that. On the progress on English language proficiency, and I think we have a question. We'll come back to Renee here in just a second. Renee, is it, let's just pause there. Renee, I think I see that you have a question. I see your hands up.
Hi, thank you, Rhonda. Yes,
good to see you.
Just good to see you. A couple more questions about on demand, and this information may have been given to districts, but I don't have it at my level as a teacher. So on the on demand editing portion, will that look similar to what we see on ACT for English editing, or is there information on KDE's website where I could get more detail about what that will look like?
Yeah, Jennifer, I think we have a practice exam up. Is that correct? And
we do. Hi, Renee. Good to see you. Thanks.
Hi, Jennifer.
So yes, we do have information about what the test looks like. In our February DAC training, we were able to provide what's called the items and times chart. And so district assessment coordinators, building assessment coordinators have access to exactly the number of forms for on-demand writing, how many items, how many text sets there are as well. So there are detailed information about the all of the assessments, as well as there are practice items for each of the content areas at the different grade levels. So there is Kentucky Portal link that we can provide for you that takes you to actually practice items that will show and demonstrate and can be used with your students in the classroom to prepare and get the students very comfortable with the types of writing on-demand items that they will have. I will note for you, one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Jennifer.
I will note for you that for the on-demand writing, there is one prompt that will that the students will respond to, but there's a text set that they will be able to read and utilize as they respond. And that text set includes a number of sections that the student will read and be able to utilize to respond to that prompt.
Thank you. And one more question. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, go ahead, Renee.
Yeah. So have the teachers who will do the standard setting, are they part of pre-established teacher groups, or are those teacher groups being created, and how are they being created?
We work very closely with our partners in the Office of Teaching and Learning, and they have, I want to say that they put out a survey for people that would be interested in that. Now, I know we've done that previously, and they've done a survey with the standard setting for for science, and they look for that. But we welcome anyone who has interest in the content expertise in that area. So if you have people that you would like to be a part of it, or if you would like to be a part of it, you would be welcome.
And what we'll probably need to do, Renee, as Jennifer says, we always try to partner with OTL to identify the teachers for the invitation. Then, you have some teachers who just aren't available in the summer, and then we roll to another person on the list. And Pearson actually does the contact for us. But I think, and we typically go out to see who is interested. So we're not sure of which step we're at with OTL, but that's the normal process. So we will be happy to get you a little more information. I also wanted to say Jennifer and I go nowhere without Ben Riley. And so Ben has put in chat some of the links for you all as the questions that you're bringing up. So he has the time charts there, as well as I think Janet Beth has put a comment about the Pearson. And while it goes on the Pearson site, the practice tests are available to the public. So we can get you links for that as well.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So kind of shifting gears to a different assessment that's required in federal law and therefore in state as well to meet the compliance issues federally. And that is the yearly test of English acquisition. How well are non-English speaking students who come to the U.S. as English as a second language, how well are they progressing on becoming proficient English speakers? And so you will see that that is listed here, and we will look at status in a particular way and change with English language proficiency, and we have that listed. But I do notice that we have a special guest that's arrived. So Janet Beth, I will turn it over to you to welcome Dr. Glass, and we'll respect his time, and then Jennifer and I can pick back up with this after.
Dr. Glass, we're so glad you're here. SCAAC has been waiting for you to talk, and we're glad you could make it for us. We've learned about L3, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and we've heard a little legislative update. So.
Okay, well, all my thunder has been taken then, Janet Beth. So I'll try not to say anything that's overly exciting or will get us in the news. That'll be my goal, which is a challenge for me on a daily basis. Well, if you heard from Brian, then he gave you an exhaustive report on the where the legislature is right now. I think the high level takeaways on that is that they're down in this funnel end. There's a lot of things going to be moving quickly. While I think there are lots of things we should be concerned about, there's also some things that we should be positive about. So the budgets that are both in the House and the Senate were at the beginning of the legislative session. They were positive surprises. They were better than we expected out of the legislature. And there are increases to SCAAC funding. There are increases to construction funds. There's a significant increase to career technical education. So those are good things that we see. The House bill did contain funding for kindergarten, the continuation of that. The Senate took that out. We don't really expect the Senate to leave that out. We think that's probably a bargaining chip as the House and Senate work to find a budget that they will both agree on. None of us like the concept of kindergarten being used as a bargaining chip, but it was last session, and it looks like it's going to be again. But I think we should be positive about several aspects of the funding bills that are coming through. One of them also that is the addition of transportation funding that has been something that's been unfunded in Kentucky for many years. And so if the legislature funds this, it does create much more flexible use of funds at the local level, because they don't have to use their local general fund dollars to fund transportation at the level that they have before. Again, we'd love to see more dollars put into that, but there's sort of a new formula that the House came up with, or just 70% funding of the formula that the Senate has. That's much better. Either one of those is much better than what we had before. So I think we should be optimistic about that, and there will be some good things that happen as a result of that. Brian probably went through a lot of the other bills, so I won't belabor that because you've already heard on that. I'll also touch just briefly on the importance of the United We Learn effort as it relates to your work around assessment and accountability. A major focus out of United We Learn is the work of the L3s and the redesign of our assessment and accountability system that I think comes from this place of wanting our students to be prepared for a globally interconnected, fast-moving, automated future where we know that skills or tasks and things that can be done by machines that are purely content-based in nature or repetitive and routine, they're going to be replaced by machines. They already are. So we have to think about the world that we already live in that is only accelerating and getting faster. How can we change the experiences of our students in our schools to prepare them to be workers, to be citizens, to participate and live full and enriched lives in that world that's here and is just speeding up as time moves on. So that really asks us to think about how can we create experiences for our students in school that emphasize human skills, deeper learning skills, communication, complex problem solving, and reasoning, creativity, persistence, these kinds of things that aren't measured very well on a standardized test, but we know are really, really, really important to people's success as human beings. They're much more important to your success as a human being than what we're able to get at on the standardized measure. So that's the big idea that I think is at the heart of the United We Learn effort, is change the experience of our student to make it deep and meaningful, engaging and enriching, authentic to the student, and that and a recognition that our assessment and accountability systems, while well-intended, have become a hindrance to shifting to that kind of learning. So we look at the things that we measure on the test. It's primarily content. There is some effort at deeper learning skills that are in there. So there, for example, inference or problem solving, there are elements of those things, but you're really not getting to that rich set of authentic skills that I was talking about before on a standardized measure. And then, of course, the work that students do in a standardized assessment is a very alien environment to what life and work is really like. So the testing environment that we create, I guess I question its predictive validity in that kind of environment. How often in life do you really have to work and behave in that sort of constrained environment? So it's very different. And again, I don't mean to impugn or throw any shade on work that's been done. There was a good reason that we put assessments in place around accountability that was rooted in equity and wanting to make sure that all students were getting basic skills and concepts, and that we were shining light on groups of students who had been overlooked for many years. That was the whole sort of moral purpose behind No Child Left Behind and what it was about. And so that's something that every educator should hold dear and important, that we've moved past, to use President Bush's quote, that soft bigotry of low expectations, and we have high expectations, and then all students can succeed. So, but I think we're at a point where there's a strong desire, and it was in the United We Learn report and effort going forward for us to rethink assessment and accountability, because there's this real sense that it's limiting the kinds of learning shifts that we'd like to see happen in our schools. And I appreciate Rhonda and her team. They've been engaged in this effort and working to support it, always bringing us back to quality measures and having us think about how we build upon some of the successes that we've had around assessment in the past. Another major concept that's in United We Learn, and I'll end on this and then turn to you for any questions or feedback or thoughts that you might have, just anything you want to talk about with me. There's this real notion around a concept that they call co-creation, and what it means is when we brought together the group that wrote the United We Learn report, it included teachers and students and parents and community members and business leaders and school administrators. It was a broad range of people that were involved and engaged in education. And they looked at a bunch of data that we collected in interviews and surveys and listening tour around the state. And they developed sort of a current state of education and a future state. So here's where we are, here's where we'd like to be, and here's the work between the two. And what what they said is that as we shift toward this new place in education, we want to be involved in that. We want to co-create that with you. So this shouldn't be something that you do as the state chief or the governor or the state board or the legislature. This should be something that continues to involve all Kentuckians. So that's a value that we've tried to adopt at the Kentucky Department of Education around this co-creation. These advisory meetings, and this one included, that we have at the state are part of that as we design and bring forward new ideas and concepts. We heard clearly from that United We Learn group that we should do it with this value of co-creation with people who are affected in the state. So I'll stop there and see if there's any feedback or questions that folks have for me. And when that's over, I'll be whooshed away to my next Teams or Zoom meeting instantly. So I'll pause here.
Any questions from the committee? So just one thing, Dr. Glass, as someone who's in her 21st year as a district assessment coordinator, I think you have a real opportunity for co-creation of how so much of assessment and accountability is focused on the students taking the test, but the real learning comes when we start looking at results. And I think districts need models of how to make the result analysis a co-creation process. How do we actually involve our communities in meaningful ways in saying, what have we learned? Where are we? What do we need to do moving forward? So I really think there's some great opportunity. We think it's been about 5 years since we've had a strong set of assessment results come out, and then there be an accountability. And so I think it's a real opportunity to change how schools and districts engage in the analysis of that data. And I know that the DEIB folks are reading street data. You know, how might we take some ideas from that and merge it in with this analysis session, so we're not just looking at the numbers and we're looking at the whole child?
Excellent points. And I think I completely agree that we move forward not when we just get data or see a report. It's when we sit down as people in a school or a team within a school or within a community, and we say, what does this mean, and how is our practice and our behavior and the experiences of our students going to change as a result of this? For me, it all comes back to like the nucleus, the center of this is, what is the student experiencing? And is that experience preparing them for the world that they're going to step into? And if everything comes back to that, and our efforts come back to making that experience rich and authentic and meaningful, then we're on the right track. And to the extent that conversations around data inform that, all the better.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, Dr. Glass, thank you again, and enjoy your travel through the Zoom-verse as you go to your next meeting.
Thanks, Annabeth. I'll just conclude by saying thank you for all of you for being a part of this, and also for all of the work that you've done over the past couple of years supporting your kids, your community, your schools through COVID. You don't hear it enough, but please hear it from me. You're appreciated, you're valued. I don't know what we'd have done without you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Rhonda and Jennifer, back to talking about English learners, I think is where we left you.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. I think we had concluded with the statements on English learners. So let's move forward on the next indicator of the quality of school climate and safety survey. It is, again, an indicator that was part of the legislation from the General Assembly that perception data is used to provide information about the school and the environment the students are engaged in. As we've mentioned many times, we want the students to be engaged in a caring environment so that they have quality relationships. They have that sense of belonging that Dr. Fields talked about earlier, safety, and both emotionally and physically safe in the environment that they are in. Toward that end, the Quality of School Climate and Safety Survey has been developed with these two constructs, the climate as well as the safety. And every student takes each of these items and they respond to the items within the survey. They respond whether they strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree. There are multiple statements in each of the forms. There is a elementary school form that's for grades 3 through 5. That's very similar in items, but the verbiage is appropriate for an elementary school student. For high school, in middle school, there's a form that is grades 6 through 12. Some of the items, for example, on the climate and safety survey for grades 3 would be things like, my school is a caring place. I feel like I'm a part of my school. All my teachers make me feel welcome in their classroom. And that type of responses that they would go to on climate. And then for safety, items such as adults in my school work hard to make sure students are safe. Adults in my school handle safety concerns very quickly, and so forth. So those contribute to the overall perception of the students within that school. Now, this year, again, we will also administer the Opportunity to Learn survey, and this gets to the students in their experiences this year for the 21-22 school year, similar to what we used last year to gather information. Those Opportunity to Learn statements, there are around 9 statements, and they include such things as, when my school was out, I was able to work with my teachers and classmates online, or other things like, when I was out of school, I watched a video recording from my teacher almost every day. So those pieces of the Opportunity to Learn survey are important to gather insight to what is happening in the school, but that Opportunity to Learn is not included in that Quality of School Climate and Safety indicator, as the Quality of School Climate and the safety measures are. So that is just that Opportunity to Learn is just additional information that is provided to the school, so that again, that perception of what the students are feeling and thinking. The next indicator is the post-secondary readiness indicator, and it again is attainment of necessary knowledge, skills, and dispositions for students to successfully transition to the next level. There are 2 resources here that you can view that is used to determine and all of the different opportunities that students have. There are multiple ways, both academically and in the career side, for students to demonstrate readiness for post-secondary readiness. There, as Brian mentioned, there is a bill in the legislature now that would reduce the number of ways, or the number of that the student would have to attain in order to demonstrate readiness. Currently, there are 2 measures that they have to attain. That bill would reduce it down to 1. So we're going to keep a close eye on that piece of legislation and how it impacts this indicator particularly. We also, as part of the post-secondary readiness, it is based on the students that graduate, or what we call in the student information system, Infinite Campus. They receive a G code, which is a graduation code. So those students who receive a G code that graduate, or the students that are in grade 12 who don't graduate, are included in the post-secondary readiness measure. And that is based on what we call the 100-day rule. So those students that are accountable to the school need to be in that school and enrolled in that school 100 days. Otherwise, the student is accountable to either another school or another district or the state. The final indicator is the graduation rate. The graduation, obviously, again, is high school only, and that rate measures the percentage of students who receive a diploma based on that cohort of 4 and 5 years. So again, the graduation rate indicator includes both the 4-year and the 5-year rate. And it is based on and reported for all students as a whole, so all the students in the school, and then individually as student demographic groups. Now, alternate assessments, they do impact the graduation rate for both those students who do not graduate. They are included in the 4 and 5 year rate, and the schools that are below 80% on the 4-year graduation rate are identified as comprehensive support and improvement, so CSI schools. So there's a number of different ways that graduation rate impacts accountability. First is the indicator. It's the combination of the 4 and 5 year. But then also you have just the 4-year rate alone that is used to identify that federal classification of comprehensive support and improvement. So those are two distinctions that are pretty important when you come to determining what's used in accountability at the state and federal level. Now, so you have each of those different indicators, and they come together for the school at varying percentages. So those indicators will receive an indicator score. So all those indicators, whether it's state assessments results in reading and math, science, social studies and writing, English progress, quality school climate safety, post-secondary readiness, and graduation rate, those will all have their own individual indicator score. So schools will know where they stand on each of those different indicators. They also we will bring those together into one overall score. And you may wonder, well, how do you put together an overall score? Well, it's based on weights. It's a calculation that through an inclusive process, we worked with many advisory councils, SCAAC included, in the Kentucky Board of Education, provided input on these weights. And these weights are both a reflection of the importance of each of the measures, as well as the requirements from federal legislation. Dr. Glass mentioned the Every Student Succeeds Act, the most current legislation of the ESEA statute at the federal level, and that piece of legislation requires specific weights to be in states' accountability. For example, reading and math has to be have the biggest weight, and it has to be more, as well as at high school, the combination of the reading and math along with graduation rate has to be more than 50% of our accountability system. So these weights demonstrate how, along with those individual indicator scores, the percentage that will be brought into that overall score for our schools and districts. Once we get that overall score, then that overall performance at each level. So each level, it will have its own type of score because they're going to be different, right? Those percentages are different. So those scores individually will go into what we call another standard setting. So this summer, we will have teachers and educational leaders, district assessment coordinators, principals, superintendents. They'll come together to determine what makes this overall rating. And Senate Bill 158 in the 2020 legislation identified that it would be a rating system that would be displayed in what's called a dashboard. So this color-coded rating system has been developed where that red is the lowest rating and blue is the highest rating. And you can see throughout the progression from lowest to highest using colors of green, yellow, and orange. So those performances of that on that overall score will be displayed in the school report card through a dashboard, and schools districts will receive the a color rating from lowest to highest. Also, based on the that overall score and how those come together in different ways, we have federal designations of comprehensive support and improvement, targeted support and improvement, and additional targeted support and improvement. Now, these are federal classifications that through a series of negotiations back and forth through the ESSA state plan. It's a consolidated state plan. The department has worked with the U.S. Department of Education on how to identify these particular federal designations. For the fall of 2020, reporting will identify schools for CSI to be supported then in the upcoming year. This will be a classification of the lowest 5%, or again, those schools that have a graduation rate below 80%. And the next identification of CSI will be in the fall of 2025. So we'll report this year and in the fall of 2022, CSI schools, and then we will not report again until 2025. For targeted support and improvement in the fall of 2022 will be based on, again, this 1 year of data for 21-22 school year. And we will use only this 1 year of data. And we do not have information from the previous two years that we would utilize for accountability. So working through an addendum process and negotiation through the department, that identification of CSI will be based again on that 1 year of data, and then it will roll forward in the future. And for ATSI, it will not be reported and identified for the fall of 2022. So let me pause here and see, Rhonda, do you have anything to add to any of those definitions?
Sure. I'll just a couple of things I want to emphasize for you. When we think about the graduation requirements and even, well, let me back up a little bit. Jennifer, can you go back a slide for me? Okay, one more. And one more. I wanted to go back to the post-secondary readiness. As Jennifer mentioned, keep your eye out on Senate Bill. It's 59, I believe. And that is the one that might change the number of readiness measures a student has to be successful on to demonstrate readiness. Right now, we're requiring either in the academic or the career track, and they can mix it. You have to have two things. You have to have something in the qualitative area and something in the quantitative. So math, science kinds of areas, or, it could be arts and humanities, language, could be visual arts, performing arts, psychology, sociology. There's lots of opportunities through AP and other areas for students to demonstrate readiness. But the Senate Bill 159, as a piece of its work, reduces that to one item. So we'll keep an eye on that. That has potential for making a change. And Jennifer brought that up with you, and Brian mentioned that as well. But that's definitely one to kind of follow, and we'll keep people informed of it as well. So then going back to where we were in the process, just one thing about the federal, just to give you a little bit more information. The state law requires us to use 3 years of data to identify TSI, targeted support. And we approached the U.S. Department of Ed, the department approached the U.S. Department of Ed to seek a potential waiver to not identify TSI until we had 3 years of usable data. We were told politely, no, you must go ahead and identify TSI this year. So the end result is we've got to identify on the results that we have and what we think has the least disruption to it. So obviously we don't want to go back to last year's data or the year before, and we had a year off with no testing. And so last year we had partial testing. Some individual districts had pretty high numbers of students testing. People put a lot of effort to get their kids tested, but it was a shorter form of the test. There were several, and again, it wasn't consistent across the state, and that is true across the country. Kentucky actually had quite high numbers compared to some of our colleagues around this country. The lowest I've heard is a state that had about 30% of kids that got tested. So that's really low compared to what we have. So obviously that data, we don't consider it really complete. And so that means we're kind of at the 1 year. So just wanted to make you aware that there had been efforts behind the scenes to see what was possible with TSI, but we were told very nice and politely, no, you need to identify this year. So we will be doing that. So Jennifer, I think that catches us back up. Great job on those. And I think you've got something here to remind us about minimum end too.
Hey,
And I think
before we
Janet,
get to that,
you got a question,
I have a
Janet
quick
Beth?
question on TSI and CSI.
Yes.
So the schools that have currently had those labels, are they now out and there's a complete reset?
I think there is a reset. We'll rerun the list. There is the potential, obviously, that someone who was in and has been consistently in hasn't moved out of the bottom 5.
Right.
So there is a sense in which you could have some number of schools continuing with the label, but it is my understanding that it's not just a replacement this year. The idea that if so many exit out, we'll replace, but it's they have to be out of the bottom 5 to get out and not be in that designation. And I see that John Wickheiser has reminded me of that in chat as well. So you got to be out of the bottom 5. So it's in essence, it's a redo.
Okay. And so my last question around that is it's actually a statement, just in case somebody on the committee is wondering what that means. From a district standpoint, I would tell you that CSI and TSI are basically additional levels of support from the Kentucky Department of Education for your school or district that works to get your trend of data to change and get you out of those bottom 5% categories. And so if you were wondering what that meant, that is what that means. So.
Right. Thank you, Janet Beth. That's a good reminder for folks. And we did want to remind you that minimum end has changed this time around, a little bit about that. So I think, Jennifer, we've got a couple of slides here. We've had a lot of conversation on minimum end. That is really the number of students that you feel you can report on with the safety of data around it. And Kentucky has used a number 10 for many, many years, but we've used 10 per grade. So in a school that has a normal configuration, and by the normal, I mean an elementary that's a 3, 4, 5, a middle school that's a 6, 7, 8, high school that's a 9, 12, then very quickly you reach 30. But there are some schools that have odd configurations where maybe they have 4 grades in the data. They have been, in essence, they have had an extra number. They've had 10 more students included. As we looked at this across all of the schools, we felt the fairest balance of reliability with simplicity was to move the minimum into 30. Now, we also think it's important to be transparent with what the performance is. So we'll continue to report at a 10, but for making accountability decisions, we've moved the minimum to 30. And remember, this is a school-based report. And so this will be a new piece to come in. The rules around are you in accountability or not for a school are the same. You have to be enrolled for 100 days to be in the accountability system, with a few exceptions. As we mentioned, graduation rate does not have an accountability of 100 days on top of that calculation. So, Jennifer, I'm going to pause there and see if there were a couple things that you wanted to highlight on the minimum in as well. I think I kind of gave the general information around it, but you might have something else in mind there you want to share.
No, I think that's where we were at. As Rhonda mentioned previously, we had reported and included in accountability 10 per grade. And so that's going to change, especially with accountability. Also, with the school report card, there are a number of changes that will be made within the school report card. Based on the reporting from last year, there were a number of places that had to be suppressed. There is FERPA legislation, and there are ways that we must conceal and times that we must conceal information so that it protects the students that could possibly be determined what their scores were. So with the reporting within the school report card, there's going to be a little less information shared so that we will not have to suppress as much.
One thing I was mentioning as well is federally, we are required to report every school. And so if we have a really tiny school, we may have to utilize the 10. There will be an agreement within our state plan with the U.S. Department of Ed, but you cannot allow a small school not to be reported. And there are different ways states handle that. Sometimes they roll together multiple years of data. Sometimes they simply drop to a smaller rule. But that is, again, a thing that we work through with the U.S. Department of Ed. But we have very few schools that would fall into that category. Most schools have a sizable population of students. And so I think that moves us next then to talking about, well, we've talked about accountability for this year. What do we need to be thinking about moving forward, beginning and reporting in 23? And so I think Jennifer's got a couple of things here just to highlight for you.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, this year for the 21-22 school year, it's on status only. So beginning in 22-23, we'll then have 2 years of status. So we'll have the status for this spring, and we'll have the status for spring of 23. So with those indicators, we'll be able to see the change between those. And so beginning next year in the fall of 23, reporting will be both status and change, and we'll bring together status and change into that overall for the levels for each school. Now, each indicator for status for beginning this year will be reported from very low to very high. So the school for each of the different indicators will be reported of very low, medium, high, or very high. So that is status. And then beginning in the fall of 2023, they'll have indicators for change of increase significantly to decline significantly. So you can imagine that they would be increased significantly, increased, maintained, declined, or significantly declined. So those will be provided within the school report card, so that those will give you some indication of how the individual school and district is doing on both status and change. Now, we'll bring together these again in that overall, as we talked about, those indicators coming together for status and change, and we'll bring together different advisory groups and the Kentucky Department of Education and the local Superintendent Advisory Council have decision-making in the cuts for status and change, and to the in advising the commissioner on those cuts. So what we'll do is we'll look toward both the department and LSAC for input around where those cuts are for that overall. Now, it's based on percentile cuts for status and change based on a distribution. And so that will happen in standard setting next year. So we'll have standard setting this year on status only, and then we'll come back next year to include status and change, and those different levels of cuts that will determine what those different colors are for those overall ratings. And the goal is to have those cuts remain in place for 6 years. And we are hoping that will be able to be maintained or until it no longer supports annual meaningful differentiation between schools that's required by ESEA. Rhonda, would you like to add anything to that?
I'll just mention that the legislation does add LSAC as a very meaningful approval piece. Then that's not been there in the past. Now we'll still bring together people to help do the formal standard setting, and then that'll give LSAC something to react to. The department has always been involved. It does not specifically have the Kentucky board, which is a little different as well, but it has the LSAC is Local Superintendents Advisory Council. So it's a governor appointed committee of superintendents in the state, a relatively small committee.
And Rhonda, I'll just jump in. I believe when you all wrote 703 KAR 5270, you mentioned that the process shall be advised by, you named the Kentucky Technical Panel as well as
Right.
SCAAC was in there.
That's
so
right.
I just want all the committee members to know we are listed as one of the advisory groups.
That is correct. So we'll be bringing some things back to you. We'll contract with the Center for Assessment to sort of help us with this work, because it is a highly technical process to use. And so we will reach out for some technical support on that, as we've done in the past with standard setting.
We've mentioned a couple of times the dashboard will be utilized in the school report card. And again, it's based on those color-coded performances and that overall indicator. So they'll be combined status and change for 2023. And it will be reported both the overall status and change by school and district, and then individually by the student groups for those individual groups. And then the overall, again, that overall aggregate overall performance will be based on all of those state indicators. And this table is an example of how we'll bring together both status and change for each of the indicators. So you can see down the left-hand side for status and across the top for change, and where they intersect on each of those performances would be then the rating for the individual indicator. Now, there'll be tables similar to this developed next year for each of the indicators within the accountability system that we've mentioned today.
Jennifer, you mentioned each of the indicators. Will they also be designed for levels and district, or do we anticipate one table for everyone?
So we'll look toward the standard setting. I want to say that it will be based on each indicator. Now, whether we have different ones for different levels. Such as elementary, middle, and high, that it may be different, but we'll have to go through that standard setting.
I think
Yeah.
it's important
think
that we
that's-
have
yeah.
a strong conversation about that, because historically the standards have been different based on the levels, and that has
Right.
allowed some levels to not make the same amount of progress as others.
Right. And that's one we can bring up. And then obviously when we come back and talk about the standard setting plan, I'm kind of like Jennifer, though. I expect if there is a variance, it would be by level. And part of that is just, it might even reflect more in the overall, because you're going to have some elements not included at certain levels. For instance, your high school has a lot more components than our elementary levels do. They have a couple more items that go in. So, but that's an excellent question. And I've made a note as well. And we really haven't gotten to that level of detail on the standard setting, particularly with the 4. So good question, comment there.
In addition to the resources that are provided in the Google folder, we have linked here for you a few of the additional resources. The Accountability at a Glance is an overall compilation of what we've talked about today, those indicators and the weights and how they're brought together. So that's a good resource for you as SCAAC members who want to talk about and be well-versed in the accountability system. The Assessment and Accountability Reporting through 2024 is a document that provides the current plan for assessment, accountability, and reporting for the next few years. And again, those are tentative dates. That's a draft because multiple steps have to occur in order to implement that. So it could change depending on the completion of activities, particularly the approval of standards, content area standards. Link for you, the last 2 are just for informational. Our division provided back to school trainings on accountability, and there was a PowerPoint and a video that was provided, and thought maybe that would be of interest to our SCAAC members as well. So there's a different resources, as well as Ben has put over some links to the Kentucky portal, as well as those practice items in the chat. Just a couple last notes. We have a competitive grant. Ron, do you want to explain where we are with that?
Sure. I can just mention this. The U.S. Department of Ed has released a competitive grant, and they have indicated 2 priorities they're looking for. Years ago, these were called enhanced assessment grants, and now they have a different title. But the 2 priorities, one is around academic achievement using multiple measures and from multiple sources. And then there's one on academic achievement through the comprehensive assessment instruments, with an emphasis on standards and competency-based education. So obviously, you've heard today about L3 work. You've heard the commissioner talk about the United We Learn. You've heard information about our diversity equity work in the department. We are looking at this grant opportunity, and we have some partners that have worked with the L3 support. And so there is some discussion around applying. We plan to submit at least a letter of intent to apply. And the letter of intent doesn't lock you into anything, but it just allows for the U.S. Department to have, for planning purposes, to anticipate how many might come in and what they might be trying to achieve. But we've begun to do some work led by a number of, again, the partners who have been involved in the support of the L3s. Will it be involving the L3s as well in conversation around the grant? So at this point, we just want you to be aware, because you might see it, a little bit of information about it. Typically, you have to put things out for public comment if you're submitting something to the U.S. Department of Education. So we just want you to be aware that this is one you might see popping up on the radar. It is a quick turnaround on it. I think the final submission has to be in sometime in April. And so it just a little bit, I think around the 18th of April, something like that. So this has a very tight timeline. This would be something that's like a narrow focused kind of grant, probably. But at the same time, we just want you to be aware of it. We can come back and talk more about it. Obviously, it's competitive. We might submit something that we think is wonderful from Kentucky, and it still might not get funded. That's just part of the process. But if we do submit, we'll do our best to get it funded. And our office is really kind of just involved in supporting the work again, not directly involved in in leading the work, but as part of the team. And so we just want you to be aware of that. You also probably saw recently there was a public that we have submitted to the U.S. Department of Ed. There's been very little flexibility offered this year around assessment and accountability, but there has been a little bit of ability to like shift out your long-term goals by a couple of years. And we thought we should take advantage of that. Then there also was some changes around some exit criteria that came out of Dr. Foster's office. And so we put that also had to have a public comment period. And you probably saw that fairly recently with a public release. So this is one we'll try to keep you in the loop on. And certainly can let you know when this develops. But obviously, it'll be moving fast if we actually submit. But at this point, we're at least working on the notion of submitting. So I don't want to lock us in that, we could find that we get to the end, we don't narrow it down enough, and we'll decide not to submit. But at this point, we're moving forward to try to work with the submission and involve the L3s in that process. And then, Jennifer, I think you told them how to find us right after the day is over here. It's one way to find us. Most of you have my number and everything, too. And you're welcome to call at any point. Jennifer, I know, feels the same way. But this is our general contact information.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Yes, let's pause here and see if there have any other questions. I know we've taken a few along the way.
It doesn't look like we have any questions. I'm checking chat.
Great.
And certainly we'll work with your chair and your vice chair. And as you want to dive a little deeper into something, we can come back as this work evolves. But that's just to kind of get everybody a little base level of information and some contact with some resources. I'm more than happy to talk to you at any point if you dig a little deeper into those and need some support.
I would really encourage everybody to be very familiar with the accountability at a glance, as well as one of my favorite resources, which is basically looking at accountability and reporting through 2024. That way, if you get asked a question, you at least kind of have in your head, okay, what are we talking about right now? Because for the next couple of years, we continue to experience some changes. And then hopefully, like Jennifer and Rhonda said, we'll hold for 6 years. And that's a big hope. Rhonda has been around and Jennifer with me the whole time. And, if it does, we're all going to go out and have a big party that we held for 6 years.
There you go.
But those resources are really great. They're short, they're brief, and they're just good to have as a reference point. So as you move forward through the spring season, our next meeting is July 19th, which is summer. Please try to mark it on your calendars. We have a little bit of flexibility with our ability to meet virtually compared to some years in the summer where everybody's gone and off. So if your backdrop is really the beach, we won't complain too much if we're here in our offices and you have a great relaxing backdrop. But at this time, if there are any other questions, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Leslie Jeffries, Hart County. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Leslie. And can I get somebody to second that?
Debbie Atherton from Bullitt County. I second.
Okay. Thank you to everybody who hung in there for this virtual meeting. And I appreciate your work on this. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to Heather or I. And also Rhonda and Jennifer are always accessible as well. So do mark your calendar for July 19th.